Hi, guys.
Hello, Rabbi. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. All righty.
Hello.
Hi, Jacob. So yesterday we ended with the mitzvah to kill all the people in a city that's an Ir Hanidachas, and also to destroy all their belongings, so there's no spoils from the city. And I had mentioned that the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that there never was one and there never will be one. There was an argument about that. And most commentaries understand that argument to be more of a kind of poetic argument, a metaphoric argument, that he means that Jerusalem is a kind of Ir Hanidachas.
Because of the history?
What?
Because of the history?
Because it was destroyed because of let's say, at least in the Babylonian exile, but it was at the Babylonian destruction. One of the explanations is that it was destroyed because of the violation of mortal crimes, which would include idolatry, so this person is asserting that metaphorically Jerusalem was a city that was destroyed, like an Ir Hanidachas, and so the Gemara's assertion would stand that this is one of the mitzvahs. They discussed three over there: the rebellious son, the city, the Ir Hanidachas, the city that is to be wiped out because a majority of the people in the city are idolaters. And then this is talking about Jewish people, and also the house that was afflicted with something called tzorat, whatever tzorat of the house is. So all three of them are sort of on the books, but they never actually will be carried out. They weren't, and they won't be in the future. And we talked about that sort of in depth yesterday. Why there would be a rule on the books if you're not going to carry it out, etc. So now we're moving to the mitzvah to destroy the seven nations. So this, we also talked a little bit about this yesterday, about God commanding us to kill people and to go to war, etc. So this next mitzvah is specifically with reference to what were the seven nations. So this is at the conquest during the time of Joshua, but it's still part of the 613 mitzvahs. And that is that he commanded us to kill the seven nations that dwell in the land of Canaan and to destroy them, since they are the root of idolatry and its first base. So this this seems to be a kind of punishment to the seven nations. This is not merely a battle for land that rightfully belongs to the Jewish people. This is a kind of payback to the nations for their behavior. You see this in a few different places, that God says to Moshe, Even in Vayikra, and I think in the end of Achrei Mos and in Kedoshim, he mentions that the land is going to spit them out because of their depravity and immorality. And so it seems like at the same time that this is pragmatically beneficial to the people of Israel, because we're going to take over this land. It seems like it's also at the same time a punishment to the seven nations for the kind of immoral, corrupt society that they had, which he identifies specifically with idolatry. But over there, it also talked about immorality and depravity, incest, and other kinds of things that they were involved with. So on the one hand, the Jewish people are warriors and liberators of the land. On the other hand, they are executioners. They're like executing God's sentence, as it were, against these nations. So the Rambam, and therefore the Rambam is associating with it, they are the root of idolatry in its first base. This would also help to understand why they can't have, why they're not supposed to be remnants of them, because they represent a kind of seed of corruption and especially idolatry. And
they sacrifice children and stuff.
One of the things that they are accused of is sacrificing children. Yeah, Molech, the worship of Molech and the sacrifice of children. But this is not limited to the seven nations, as this was also identified in Yirmiyahu, in the prophet Jeremiah, who's living during the time already, of the end of the first Beis Hamikdash. So the conquest of the seven nations is approximately 1300 before the Common Era, and Yirmiyahu is writing approximately like 600 before the Common Era. So so this is even 700 years later. There continued to be sacrifice to child sacrifice, primarily to this the God is identified in the Torah as Molech. But if you look in Achrei Mos and Kedoshim, it also talks about incest. It talks about other things. The Rambam is identifying idolatry and the fact that they are roots of idolatry, which is also mentioned with reference to them. And that Rabbi, is his. Yeah.
Before you delve too deeply, because if it wouldn't take too long, could you just give? Because I'm curious, when did the seven nations get down to six? Because in Yam Suf, we talk about, we enumerate six, and a lot of I forgot which one dropped out. If it wouldn't take too long,
right? This is actually mentioned in the Medrash, because at some point the Girgashi are not mentioned anymore, and so the ones that are mentioned are the other six. And the Medrash says that the Girgashi just left. It does not say when, and you have to be careful with Medrash, because Medrash is specifically not a historical document, and therefore it doesn't necessarily fill out the full historical picture when it mentions something, but it does say that the Girgashi just left. They escaped or they left. There's a whole nother discussion about these seven nations, because there seem to be and this is from the Torah and also in Navi, there seemed to be people from these nations that lived outside the boundaries of what was called at the time Canaan. There were Amorites, for instance, that are living on the outside of the boundaries of Canaan, that are defeated even during the time of Moshe in the Torah portion of Chukas. and there appear to be others, like there are Amalekites and others who seem to be living outside of what would be considered the boundaries of Israel. So there are those who want to suggest that they represent nationalities that are distributed they both have a presence in Canaan, but are also distributed in other parts of the world. And so, like when you're doing battle with these people, you might only be doing battle with a group of them, sort of like the Germans in the Sudetenland or something, where you have people that have an ethnic nationalist connection.
I was just reading about that
right,
like a few minutes before.
There you go. So they're living in what amounts to another country. It's hard to get real specific information because both the Torah and then the Medrash that's commenting on it are not primarily historical documents. They're not interested in giving us all the details that we'd like in order to get a historical perspective on what happened. So, but according to the Medrash, the Girgashi left, and that's why there are only 6 that are mentioned. They would have had to leave before the conquest. The Rambam talks about this in the Laws of the Kings. He talks about what is required. I mean, it comes up in this mitzvah. Were they able to sue for peace, like these nations? There's a Rambam, there's Rashi and Tosfos about this. There seems to be disagreement about when and if these nations could have reached a peaceful settlement and what peace would have looked like. So for instance, let's say one of these nations agreed to live as B'nai Noach. They agreed to give up idolatry and live in Israel as what we would call B'nai Noach, following the 7 Noahide laws, declaring that there's one God and not serving idols, etc. So would that have been allowed? So there is disagreement. I don't remember all the details of who says what. There are opinions that before the conquest began, this might be Tosfos, that before the conquest began, they had a right to reach some kind of peaceful arrangement. But once the conquest began, they no longer have that right. It could be that they continue to have that right even after the conquest begins. There's the problem of the what do you call it? The Givonim, the Gibeonites. How are they allowed to remain? The Gibeonites are part of the 7 nations. So how are they allowed to remain, even if Joshua, he made an oath to protect them, when he finds out that it was under false pretenses? Technically, the Gemara suggests he's not, the oath is voided because it was under false pretenses, but he insists on keeping it, his promise, because it would be like a desecration of God's name. He gave his word, and now it looks like he's going back on his word. But there's another issue which I discussed with Jacob before, which is that if you make a vow that goes against a mitzvah in the Torah, your vow is null and void. You can't make a vow that goes against a mitzvah in the Torah. So if they were biblically commanded to destroy these people and they don't have the opportunity to create peace because the battles have already begun, which seems to have been the case. The battles had already begun. So according to the opinion that once the battles began, they can no longer ask for peace. So even an oath to protect them wouldn't have been an oath at all. And he wouldn't be allowed to follow his oath. He'd have to follow the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to destroy them. So how were they able to be maintained and not destroyed? So this all is part of this discussion about whether a nation could sue for peace and then not be destroyed. So if they can't, then their only option is to run away, which is apparently what the Medrash is saying that Girgashi did, that they just left. You don't have to pursue them outside of the land of Israel. You just have to destroy them inside the land of Israel. And again, this would help to explain the battle is not a battle to eliminate the entire nation of the Amorites, let's say, but just the Amorites that are living in Eretz Yisrael.
Rabbi, I think like a lot of these, like if you look at the history, a lot of these, specifically these nations, they kind of function like a cult. You know, I just and I'm looking at archaeology, and they found Canaanite altars in like from 3,000 years ago in Germany, and some they say even in there was a Native American group that was possibly in southern Georgia. I don't know. I just thought I'd bring that out there. If you look into some things archaeologists are saying that don't always make the rounds, there's some crazy stuff out there. It's like
that sounds.
People don't believe in the Torah, but they found like it can prove most of this stuff, even the supernatural stuff. It's just people don't want to look at it. I don't know.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I know there's there certainly when it comes to certain idolatrous practices, that there are, at least in the region, well beyond the boundaries of Canaan, there were shared idols and idolatrous practices. The Baal worship, for instance, was prominent even beyond, way beyond the boundaries of Canaan, and the worship of Asherah or Ishtar, the fertility goddess, is something that went way beyond the boundaries. So, but hearing that there could possibly be this far, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is his gods, may he be exalted, saying, you must surely annihilate them. And he explained to us in many verses that the reason for this is so that we do not learn from their heresy. And many verses come to hint about this, meaning their killing to strengthen it, and the war against them is a commanded war. Perhaps one might think that this commandment is not practiced for all generations, since the 7 nations have already ceased to exist. So you got to ask yourself, why is he including this in a list of the 613 mitzvahs when typically he doesn't include mitzvahs that are temporary? However, it is only one who does not understand the topic of a practice that is practiced for the generations, or that is not practiced for the generations, who will think this. For it is not said about a command that is finished by the arrival of its purpose, without it being dependent upon a specific time, that it is not practiced for generations. Rather, it is practiced in each and every generation that the thing is found to be possible. So he is suggesting that it might be true that there's no active practice of wiping out the 7 nations, but should there be a resurgence of one of the 7 nations in the land of Israel, you'd be once again required, because of the original command, to wipe them out. So it happens to be, so he is suggesting there's like an active command, but there isn't a reason to act on it. But should there be, you would. Now, would you think that when God may be exalted, destroys the seed of Amalek and cuts it off with finality, as it will be soon, in other words, during the time of Mashiach, as promised to us by his saying, I will surely blot out the memory of Amalek, it is not for the generations, this would never be said. Rather, it is practiced in each and every generation. Any time that the seed of Amalek is found, it is a commandment to cut it off. And so too is killing the 7 nations and destroying them, a statement that was commanded and is a command war. And we are commanded to search for them in each and every generation until they are finished and not a single man of them remains. Now, the conquest in the time of Joshua did not entirely wipe out the 7 nations, which would mean that in theory, there could still exist remnants of those 7 nations. So he is suggesting that if at a later date, it was clear that what amounted to a remnant from those 7 nations was living in the land of Israel, it would continue to be a mitzvah to wipe them out. And so did we do in the days of David. So in the days of David, there are, for instance, the Yevusi, Jebusites. So the Jebusites actually controlled the area that David is eventually going to use as the site for the Beis Hamikdash. It was Jebusites. The Jebusites are part of the 7 nation. So David, who is active several hundred years after the conquest by Joshua, is fulfilling the mitzvah of wiping out the Jebusites when he wipes out the Jebusites that had control of part of what we call Jerusalem. Then their remnants scattered and mixed in with the other nations until no root of them remained. But it's not because they have been cut off that this command that we've been commanded should be considered a commandment. That is not practiced for the generations, even after they have finished and they have been destroyed. For these commandments are not connected to a specific time or place, like the commandments that were specified to the desert. Rather, they are connected to all times that is found that the command is possible. So for instance, the commandments about how to move the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, that is a temporary command, because once we move past a Mishkan, we're not going back to it. And it's understood that that was always a temporary command. While we were in the desert, this is what we were supposed to do. But when we leave the desert, these commands are no longer in force. That, he said, he's suggesting is an example of what we would call a temporary command. Whereas a permanent command is one that could flare up at some point in the future, depending on circumstances. And that's why he's including it. Most of this discussion has to do with why is he including this in the 613 mitzvahs when he said before he's not going to include mitzvahs that were only temporary. This appears to be a mitzvah that's only temporary. He's explaining it, that it only looks that way because of circumstances. But again, like you had in David several hundred years later, if you had a flare-up of that were remnants from these tribes, the command would still be in place to wipe them out. There was a point where the Gemara says that Sancheiriv came and mixed up the world. So, for instance, there are prohibitions against marrying Moabites or Ammonites. There's prohibitions against marrying Egyptians, even if they're converts, against marrying Egyptians who are, let's say, recently converted. You can marry the 3rd generation, but you can't marry the 1st and 2nd generation. So these mitzvahs, the Gemara suggests, no longer are active, because when Sancheiriv, and this is not just Sancheiriv, I think his father was also, he may have began this, but the Assyrians, their mode of conquest was to take over an area, move the indigenous peoples to somewhere else, and replace them. So that means that the Egyptians aren't really Egyptians anymore. The Moabites aren't really Moabites. The Ammonites are not really Ammonites anymore, because they are most likely people that weren't the indigenous people that we were speaking of before. So because of that, these prohibitions, we don't have to be concerned about these prohibitions. Like, for instance, I know my son introduced me to a young man who is an Egyptian convert. He was born in Egypt, raised as a Muslim in Egypt, decided at the age of 16 he wanted to be Jewish. He left Egypt, I think, to Turkey, and now he's a yeshiva guy. So he's an Egyptian convert. Now, but the rules of Egyptian converts, again, I'm only speaking in theory, but my understanding is he is going to be allowed to marry a woman who's born Jewish, and that rule doesn't apply anymore because of that principle that people are all mixed up. So
what if they're only like 5% mixed up?
Yeah, I'm not sure. They felt like it was really a good mixing up. I don't know.
They were speaking Egyptian language until maybe about the year 1000.
Right, but there's also, I know there were, for instance, times when other nations, besides Sancheiriv, where they had wars with other people in conflicts, like the Nabateans that were like in the Sudan and Ethiopia. There were times when they had where there were even pharaohs that came from these other populations. So again, just because they're speaking Egyptian doesn't necessarily mean that the culture is completely lost. But I agree with you. If you had completely taken them out and completely replaced them, why would they continue to speak or write with hieroglyphs or things like that? So I agree with you that it would be funny to say that they were entirely wiped out, but somehow they're satisfied that there's enough confusion about it that that these laws wouldn't apply. So that calls into question some of this thing the Rambam's talking about, but he may say that's still just a practical problem. Also with Amalek, if everybody was like mixed around in that region, then you'd assume Amalek was mixed around too. And so even if you found somebody and you saw indication of Amalekite ancestry, you might question that because they were all mixed up. That they're not necessarily the original Amalekites. So that would all need to be taken into consideration for the fulfillment of the movement, but for fulfillment of the mitzvah. But the Rambam's point would be that wasn't the intention of the mitzvah. The intention of the mitzvah was to be a mitzvah for all times, for as long as it was necessary. So this would continue. That's why he's listing it as part of the 613. For many times, the commandment will be practiced for the generation, but the thing about which we were commanded has already disappeared from certain times and places. But it does not turn into a commandment that's not practiced for the generations with the disappearance of the thing for which we were commanded. Rather, it's considered not practiced for generations when the matter is the opposite. So, for instance, you could say about the agricultural laws in Israel, taking the tithes, truma and meiser, etc., that was not practiced for a long time because the Jews were in exile. But you wouldn't say that that's a temporary mitzvah because of it. Eventually, the expectation is the Jews will come back, and the Jewish people did, Baruch Hashem, come back, and so you could have a commandment that's on the books and it's considered one of the 613, but because of circumstances, just isn't able to be practiced. And that is when certain content is in existence, but only but one is only obligated to do an action or a law at a certain time. But today it is not practiced, even though the thing is found with that matter. For example, so this is another thing. A Levite who was disqualified in the desert is suitable today with us, as it explained in its place. And understand this principle, place it upon your heart. See Parshas Shoftim. So what does he mean by that? All right, that we're going to have to see. But I'm going to have to take some time to research that. So he's suggesting that there are, let's just look back here. That is when certain content is in existence, but one is only obligated to do an action or a law at a certain time. But today it is not practiced, even though the thing is found with the matter. So there are three types of law. There's one type of law that was never intended to be permanent. It was intended just to be temporary. For instance, the laws that apply only while the Jewish people are in the desert. Then there are laws that are commanded, which were intended to be for as long as they're needed. And therefore, they're not considered temporary. And they could be needed for many generations. They could be needed for a few generations. They could be needed for a few generations, and then they pop up again. So those laws are not considered temporary laws, he's saying, like the law to destroy the 7 nations. Those laws are considered to be permanent and satisfy the requirements to be part of the 613. And now he's mentioning that there are some laws that applied at one time that might apply differently at a later time. And this has to do with the Levim, something about the Levim during the time of the desert. For some reason, there was a circumstance in which a Levi would not be able to do service during the time of the desert, but he would be able to do service now. But I don't know what he's specifically referring to. So we'll have to, again, I'll have to look that up for next time. Our next time is will be on Monday. All right, so we're going to go forward, but we're going to look back at this detail at the beginning of next time. All right, mitzvah 188 is the mitzvah to destroy Amalek. That is that he commanded us to exclusively cut off the seed of Amalek, male, female, adults, and children from among the rest of the descendants of Esau. And that is his, may be exalted, saying, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek. We already mentioned 3 commandments were commanded to Israel upon their entrance to the land: to appoint a king over them, to build the temple, and to cut off the seed of Amalek. This war is a commanded war, and the regulations of this command have already been explained in chapter 1 of Sota. What he means by commanded war is what we call Milchemes Mitzvah. There are certain rules that apply to a commanded war, to what we call Milchemes Mitzvah, that don't necessarily apply in other wars. But the war to wipe out Amalek is called a command, a Milchemes Mitzvah. Also, he mentions these 3 things. The question is, do they have to be done in order? So, for instance, we've talked in the past about whether Hamas could have the status of Amalek. There is an opinion that goes back to the Soloveitchik family. It goes back to the Beis Halevi, who was like the first of the dynasty of the great Rabbanim from the Soloveitchik family. And he argued that somebody could display characteristics of Amalek, even if we can't demonstrate for sure that these people were the seed, because we don't have a genealogy, but if they show certain characteristics, they could be deemed to be Amalek. So if they call for the destruction of Israel or for the destruction of the Jews in Israel, that would be an indication of a characteristic of Amalek. So let's say it was determined that the Palestinians in Gaza, or
Wait,
or
what
let's
if
say for
what if
simplicity,
both the leaders of Hamas and the leaders of Israel are both of Amalek? What if that's
right,
the case?
right. I don't know. That's a conundrum. But let's say, but in this case, at least you could say there's one opinion that somebody could be identified as being part of Amalek. So then, let's say let's say that was the determination, that because they as a people declared the desire to destroy the Jews, then that makes them Amalek. Let's say that's the case.
Like Hitler.
So the question would be, this
He worshipped Moloch and all these things. And
right,
all
but
the high-ranking Nazis worshipped all these idols and did sacrifices.
right, but that's not necessarily going to make you a Molech, because a lot of people did that weren't a Molech. But let's say, according to this definition, that if you call or for the wiping out of the Jewish people, attempt to carry out the wiping out of the Jewish people, that makes you a Molech. Let's just stick to that simply. So then the question would be, do you have a mitzvah to wipe out a Molech? So I asked Moshe Soloveitchik this question, and he suggested that, because if you look here at the way it's mentioned, the mitzvah is to appoint. The three mitzvahs are to appoint a king, to build the temple, and to cut off the seed of Amalek. So the question is, do they have to be in that order? Do they have to be in that order? So there are some who argue that the reason that Shaul is the first one who's commanded to wipe out Amalek, not Yoshua, not any of the judges, not Moshe, well, is that first you had to be in the land of Israel, then you have to appoint a king. So once Shaul is appointed king, that's when the mitzvah comes in, and the mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. But until Shaul is appointed king, there isn't an active mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. The conditions aren't ripe. So thing is, they didn't build a temple. If you look at this order, he says, appoint a king and build a temple. They didn't build a temple. So you'd have to say that for some reason, just having the king is necessary. But whatever it is, nowadays, so this is, he was saying this would be one of the reasons why you'd say that there isn't an active mitzvah to wipe out Amalek right now, even if, according to the Soloveitchiks, which not everybody agrees with, but even if, according to the Soloveitchiks, they have shown the characteristics of Amalek, we don't have a mitzvah to wipe them out like you do for Amalek, because we don't have the elements in place, which are either that you have to have a king and a Beis HaMikdash, or at least have a king. We don't have those elements in place. There are people that argue that we don't have to have a king. We just have to have a government that is parallel to a king, and that we do have a government, a Jewish government, and therefore that might fulfill the requirement. But anyways, this is the discussion about whether wiping out Hamas is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek or not.
Oh.
Okay, we are going to continue on Monday, and I look forward to that. I'm very grateful to have had a chance to learn with you guys. And I'm going to try to get more clarity on that thing with the Levim that the Rambam mentioned. and then we're going to move on. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
Could I
Rabbi.
just, could I just give one toe note?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, but it goes back to what we talked, the 7 nations, like in Shiriamsu, the last enumerated nation are the Girgoshi. So I guess it's sort of like the
They
tribes
are one of the 7 nations. But
yeah, but
it was
they
40
only were
years.
6. But in
There are
Shiriamsu,
40 years. There are 40 years between between Kriyas Yamsuf and when Yoshua is conquering the,
so one dropped off and one dropped on.
Who dropped down?
Well, there were 6 nations, and
There are really there are 7 nations, and at some point, according to the Medrash, the Girgashi just left.
okay, but even though in Yamsuf we mentioned the Girgashi, so that means that somebody else must have left.
No, the Yamsuf is 40 years before the conquest.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
All right, there's still
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so at that time, there would still be 7.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.